Hello there, lovely people, it's Alex from Nintendo Life here. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I absolutely love my Pro Controller for the Switch. I genuinely think it's one of the best controllers that has ever been released, and probably my personal favourite, especially with this lovely green and pink going on, although if it could all be green, that would be even better. But the Pro Controller's status may be in slight jeopardy thanks to a third-party solution that in some ways genuinely beats the Pro Controller. There'll be some people being sarcastic saying a piece of toast can beat the Pro Controller. And here it is. This is a third-party Pro Controller, if you like. I believe it's called the Advanced Wireless Gamepad by PowerA, and they very kindly sent it over for me to have a look at, because there's a very interesting thing about these that we'll get on into in a minute. This is how it's going to go down. I'm going to look at the bad stuff about this controller, you know, the things that it doesn't have over the Pro Controller, and then going to look at the good stuff and the thing that it does have over the Pro Controller, and then conclude, you know, stylishly. We are going to get into some pretty nitty-gritty details later on, so be prepared for a lot of talking about buttons and travel and that sort of thing. But anyway, enough waffling, let's dive right into things. So, right off the bat, what does this controller not have that the Pro Controller does? Well, for one thing, it doesn't have any NFC capabilities, much like pretty much every other third-party controller out there. You can't use Amiibo with it. Why? I don't know, but no other third-party controller does, so there's probably a reason. Not a massive deal breaker for me, I don't use Amiibo that frequently, and when I do, it's never a sort of a quick gotta use an Amiibo, it's sort of a, you know, I have to do 5 in a day, so I will just get another controller out and do it that way, so you know, not a big deal. Is a shame, but not a big deal. Secondly, again, like pretty much every other third-party controller out there, in fact at the moment I'd be confident in saying every other third-party controller out there, no HD rumble. At all. In fact, no rumble in the slightest. Not an enormous deal, but there not being any rumble at all does feel a bit of a shame, to be honest. I'm guessing maybe it's just due to either, you know, cost cutting, or maybe to improve the battery life, but yeah, there's no rumble at all, which is a shame. It is a shame. More of a shame than the NFC stuff. And lastly, this is a bit of a weird choice, and I don't know why they've decided to do this. Again, probably cost cutting. It doesn't have a rechargeable battery. It is indeed wireless, but it relies on double A's. I find this to be really weird, and for some people it won't be a deal breaker. For me, it's an absolute ruddy shame, I'm not going to deny that. But you know, it's still wireless, it still works, and you know, if it did have a wireless battery, I probably would move over to this full-time over my Pro Controller. But at the moment, I'm only teetering. But the fact that I'm even teetering is a big deal. That is pretty much all the bad stuff. You know, it is a real shame that it doesn't have the rechargeable battery, but you know what, it still works and you can just get some rechargeable AA's if you like, slam them in, and then recharge them when needed. Does mean you can't play and charge, so that is a shame. But it does come with some AA's in the box, which is a really nice touch, and not enough things do that these days. But enough doom and gloom, let's talk about what's right ruddy good about this thing. And there's a lot to say that is good about it. Overall, it pretty much is just the Pro Controller in terms of the form factor. I think you can see there that it's basically the same. If I can angle them together, that'd be super duper. Yeah, it's basically the same thing. Everything feels pretty much exactly the same. Very few minor differences, which we'll get onto later, but the big, real killer thing here, and the reason that this makes this a viable contender for best Switch controller, is this, and you might have just heard it. Not terribly easy to see on camera, at least as far as I can see from the viewfinder, but there are 2 extra buttons down here and 1 here. Now, what on earth are these for? These are what PowerA are calling the advanced gaming buttons, but what I'm just going to call macro buttons. Essentially, these are 2 buttons that you can remap to any face button you like on the controller. And you can do it on the fly. It doesn't need any extra software or anything like that. It's all handled with this little button down here. All you need to do is press down the button at the back here, hold it down until this light at the front starts flashing, and then you just need to press the button that you want to be mapped, for example A, and then it'll start flashing like Billy-O, and then you just press either the left advanced gaming button or the right advanced gaming button, and that will then be assigned to that. So if you press it, it'll do an A press. The buttons that can be assigned to these buttons are ZL, ZR, LR, A, B, Y, X, and the D-pad. Unfortunately, you can't do the sticks clicking in, or the plus and minus. I don't know why, but for some reason you can't, which is Bit of a shame. I don't know why they did that. Now, you may well be thinking to yourself, why the hell would I want to do that? The buttons are all there. Why wouldn't I just press them? Well, there are a couple of things that make this a genuinely really useful little thing. For a lot of games, especially Nintendo's first-party games, the controls have been mapped so well that these don't really come into it, and they can be ever so slightly useful, but generally not, you know, sort of not gonna break the bank kind of thing. For example, in for Mario Kart Deluxe, I really like assigning this button to the X button so I can look behind me without sort of having to shift my grip, which is a really minor thing, but genuinely useful. But there are a lot of games where you really don't want to take your thumb off of this button here, and that can be a really big deal if you have to adjust your grip. So, you know, sort of like Splatoon, you're going to jump, you press that, you have to take your thumb off here. It's generally fine in Splatoon because you've got the motion controls. Oh, in fact, yes, this has motion controls in it as well, so Splatoon runs brilliantly. But for a shooter that doesn't have motion controls, for example, and you want to jump, sometimes you may not want to really give up the fact that you can move the camera, so you can just assign it to this. And so all you need to do is just jump like that, and you've still got both thumbs on the sticks, which is honestly really bloody good. I found this in Monster Hunter when using the heavy bow gun, and you go into the sort of the aiming mode, and then you can sort of freely move around and fire without having to sort of go move around and then like that. It's sort of a bit clunky, so you just move around and just click in like that. Genuinely really useful. It's also fairly handy in Dark Souls if you want to switch between weapons without having to move down to the D-pad, but again, it's a very minor thing. A lot of the things that this can be used to improve are relatively minor, but if they are comfortable for you, it can be worth its weight in buttons. Actually, that's the point. I can see this being really useful in Breath of the Wild rather than moving down to the D-pad. When you want to change weapon, for example, you can just press these buttons, or, well, press and hold at least, and then you've got free movement still. That's genuinely a really cool idea, actually, because the weapon swapping is a bit clunky. So that's the killer feature, but what about the nitty-gritty? I did promise some nitty-gritty details, so let's get into those, shall we? We're going to go through it button by button, starting with the triggers and moving down to the rest of it. ZL and ZR buttons are a little bit narrower than they are on the Pro Controller, but they still feel almost identical, actually. Really nice sort of, really nice membrane under there that gives a good feel. Nice and soft, not loud at all. You hear that? Just sounds good. Same with the L and R buttons on the whole. The L button for me, for some reason, can be quite loud. I mean, that's me pressing it particularly loudly so that you can hear it. The R button, less so. I'm guessing it's just a slight variation. Plus and minus buttons, quite a lot of travel on there, but really not a big deal. Same with the screenshot button and the home button, but yeah, you know, they're sort of menu buttons, it's not a big deal. A, B, X, and Y, they're slightly rounded, which is a bit of a shame. I really like the flat buttons of the Pro Controller, and they are slightly smaller, but it's not a big deal at all. And there is slightly more travel on them, and they don't feel quite as nice to press, but it's a very minor thing. Sticks feel, honestly, exactly the same as the Pro Controller. Really nice, really soft and responsive, but with a good ping back, but nothing too violent. Genuinely really nice. The advanced gaming buttons, cheap buttons, but you know, the Pro Controller doesn't have anything to compare to, so nice. And the D-pad. Now, the D-pad is arguably slightly better than the Pro Controllers as well. A lot of people have been talking about the Pro Controller having, you know, sort of a slightly mushy D-pad that sort of sometimes doesn't up when you do it right and stuff like that. I've never had that personally, so I imagine maybe it's a batch that went a little bit wrong or something, but really don't know. But this one, the directions feel a little bit more precise overall. They just feel a little bit more, Only downside is it is glossy for some reason, which means it picks up fingerprints like a motherfucker. The only other major difference is it is ever so slightly chunkier in the hand than the Pro Controller, which actually for me, again, is an advantage, because I have quite large hands and I want to be able to sort of really grip a controller, and with the Pro Controller, it's still really good, really nice and chunky, but just not quite as chunky. It also weighs slightly less than the Pro Controller, probably due to the lack of any rumble motors. This comes in at around about 200 grams with some batteries in it, and the Pro Controller is around about 245, so you know, it's about not even 50 grams in it. Did I talk about the stick clicking? Pretty much fine. Maybe slightly louder than the Pro Controller, but meh. So in all seriousness, we are looking at a potential Pro Controller killer here. There are a few disadvantages with it, but there are also a few advantages. It's a different kind of controller, But if you don't use NFC, you don't mind batteries, and you don't really need rumble, this has got a lot of advantages, like a lot of genuine advantages. The build quality is really good as well. It does feel slightly cheaper than the Pro Controller. The plastic just feels a little bit less premium, a little bit more standard, but really, there's not a lot in it, and you're not gonna notice when you're playing games. But does it just come in red? No. PowerA felt the need to send me a lot of these. I've got 4 in total now, so you can see that you've got a white one here, which I really like the look of, and I'd love to have a closer look at, and will do. You've also got a Super Mario themed one, which is a slightly darker red than the other one, and it's got Mario's silhouette on it and a sort of a dot pattern effect, which I quite like. And there's also this one, which is apparently only at, I think that's Target. We don't have them in the UK, so not here apparently. This is obviously sort of like a Super Mario Bros themed one, and to be honest, even though it's sort of exclusive and I really like Mario Bros, this is probably the one I like the least. I don't know, it's just I don't like too many graphics on my controllers. I like them to be relatively plain or understated, so this one doesn't do it as much for me, which is a pity. And they all come with batteries. PowerA also sent me a load of other stuff that doesn't really fit in with the video, but I sort of want to at least acknowledge it, because they did send it to me free of charge, so, you know, feels rude otherwise. I'll be looking at you later. But there you have it, the PowerA enhanced wireless controller that is genuinely a match for the Pro Controller. Honestly, I'm genuinely surprised. I thought it'd be a bit clunky, but it's a really nice controller. Oh, I also forgot to mention it's cheaper than the Pro Controller as well, which again is a real advantage. It's like 15 quid cheaper. What's that in dollars? It's on screen. If you want to learn more about this thing, then make sure you check the link in the description and, I don't know, leave a comment saying you don't like red or something. I don't know. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you add 2 extra buttons to the back of that subscribe button, and be sure to check out nintendolife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye. And here it is. This is the... what the hell is it?